Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond, where every tale takes us on a journey of unexpected twists and moments that touch the soul. Tonight's story begins on a stormy evening, with rain drumming against the roof of an old auto repair shop. The dim light from a flickering street lamp cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. It was a quiet night for Thomas Harris, a man whose life had been filled with more solitude than he cared to admit. Alone, his hands stained with grease, he wiped them on a rag and let out a sigh as the wind howled outside. The storms never seemed to stop these days, much like the storms inside his heart after losing his wife and son. But just as the clock neared midnight, something unusual happened. He heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. A soft, trembling cry. Thomas froze. It was a sound he had not heard in years. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly stepped outside, squinting against the pouring rain. There, in the dim glow of the streetlight, he saw her. A young girl, maybe 15, sitting alone in the downpour. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her hair hung in wet strands around her pale face, and her body shivered uncontrollably. She was holding something close to her chest, a small, worn bag. Her shoulders heaved with the weight of her silent sobs. Thomas's first instinct was to turn back inside. His life was difficult enough, he didn't need another burden. But the sight of her, vulnerable and alone, stirred something deep inside him. He had known hardship, had felt the loneliness of losing his son. He couldn't turn away from a child in need. "Hey there, kid," he called out gently, approaching her. "You all right?" The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, but she didn't run. Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes wide with fear, yet there was something familiar in them. Then she spoke the name that struck him to his core. "Ethan," she whispered, barely audible over the storm. Thomas's chest tightened. The name hit him like a punch. His son's name. His son, who had been taken from him years ago in a tragic accident. It couldn't be, could it? How could this girl know that name? Ethan? Thomas repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "What did you say?" The girl's lips trembled, and she clutched the bag tighter against her chest. She swallowed hard, clearly struggling to find the words. I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down. "I didn't mean to say that." Thomas's mind raced, but his instincts kicked in. He wasn't about to leave her out in the rain. He stepped closer, kneeling down in front of her. "It's okay," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here. Come inside, all right? You're freezing." She hesitated but nodded, her eyes locking onto his with a silent trust. Thomas gently guided her inside the shop, away from the storm. He grabbed an old, oversized flannel shirt from the back room and handed it to her. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. "This will help keep you warm." She took the shirt without a word, her hands trembling as she pulled it on. She looked up at him with a tear-streaked face. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas stepped back, giving her space. He had to know more. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. She hesitated for a long moment, then answered softly. "Lena." Thomas nodded, but the name didn't quite fit the fear in her eyes. There was something deeper there, something that connected her to him, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. And as she sat there, clutching her bag like it was her lifeline, he couldn't help but feel that this encounter was no coincidence. Then, without warning, Lena reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. It was old, the edges worn and fragile. She handed it to Thomas with shaking hands. "This is for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as he took the envelope, feeling a cold shiver run down his spine. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was his wife's handwriting. His heart began to race. What was going on? He hesitated for only a moment before tearing it open, his mind already spinning with questions. What he found inside would change everything. As Thomas carefully unfolded the letter, his hands shook. The words on the page seemed to blur together as he tried to make sense of what he was reading. The letter was short, written in his wife's familiar script. It was addressed to him, but the words inside felt like a dream, an impossible dream that was both heartbreaking and extraordinary. My dearest Thomas. If you're reading this, then I am no longer by your side, and I can only hope that you have found the peace you deserve. I have carried a heavy secret for many years, one I could never bring myself to share. The child you never knew about, the child I gave birth to when we were separated, is still alive. Her name is Lena, and she has lived a life without knowing the love of the father she deserves. Please, Thomas, take care of her. I know this may seem like too much, but I trust you. She is your daughter. Ethan's sister. The words sent a cold wave through him. He blinked, trying to process what he had just read. Lena was his daughter. The child his wife had kept hidden from him, the child he had never known existed. He could hardly breathe as the weight of the letter sank in. His mind raced, but his body was frozen. The girl sitting across from him, shivering in his oversized shirt, was his flesh and blood. She was connected to the son he had lost, the son he had grieved for years. He looked up from the letter, his eyes searching Lena's face. She was watching him closely, her face pale and her eyes wide with uncertainty. Her hands were wringing the fabric of the shirt she wore, as if waiting for him to say something, anything. Lena, Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. You're my daughter. Lena's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly, her lower lip trembling. I didn't know. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared. Her voice was small, fragile, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe her own words. Thomas's heart broke. How could he have not known? How could he have missed this? He had spent years living with the pain of losing Ethan, and now here was Lena, his daughter, who had been right under his nose all along. His mind screamed with 1,000 questions, but none of them seemed to matter as much as the girl sitting before him, looking at him with a mixture of fear and hope. I didn't even know you existed, Thomas said, his voice barely audible. Why didn't your mother tell me? Why didn't she come to me? Lena's face tightened in pain, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She wanted to, but things were complicated. She didn't think you'd want me, not after everything that happened with Ethan. The mention of his son's name made his heart ache once more. But this wasn't about the past, it was about Lena, about the daughter he had lost all these years without even knowing. He had been a father once, and now fate had brought him the chance to be one again. He couldn't ignore it, couldn't walk away. Thomas set the letter down on the table and stood up, walking over to the window. He looked out at the storm, his mind still reeling from the revelation. But as the wind howled outside, he felt something shift within him. The grief, the emptiness, it was still there, but now it had a new focus. Lena was here. She was real. She was his daughter. And he wasn't going to let her slip away again. Turning back toward Lena, he crossed the room and knelt down in front of her. He took her trembling hands in his and looked her in the eyes. You're not alone anymore, Lena, he said softly. You're my daughter, and I will never leave you. We'll figure this out together. Lena's face crumpled as she finally let the tears fall. She threw her arms around him, holding on to him like a lifeline. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. In that moment, nothing else mattered. There was no past, no confusion, no unanswered questions, there was only the two of them, father and daughter, together at last. As the storm raged on outside, the quiet peace between them grew. This was a new beginning. And for the first time in years, Thomas felt a flicker of hope. Thomas spent the next few hours with Lena, both of them speaking in fragments, sharing what little they knew about each other. He found it hard to believe that the young girl sitting before him had grown up without a father, without the comfort of knowing her family's love. He didn't know what to say, how to process the overwhelming emotions coursing through him. But slowly, Lena began to open up. She spoke of a life filled with uncertainty, raised in foster care, bouncing from one home to the next, never really finding a place where she belonged. She'd heard stories about her mother, but they were always incomplete, always full of gaps. Her mother had never mentioned her father, never mentioned Thomas. When she was old enough to understand, Lena had started searching for answers, digging through whatever old records or documents she could find. The name Ethan had come up more than once, but it was never clear why or how. All she knew was that her mother had named her after a boy, Ethan, who had died long before she was born. You were my father's name, weren't you?" Lena asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Your son, Ethan, he was my brother, wasn't he?" Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. The weight of her words felt unbearable, a crushing reminder of the son he had lost so many years ago. It was still too much to understand, but as Lena looked at him, seeking something, maybe validation, maybe understanding, he realized just how much they shared. She had suffered without the love of a father, just as he had lost a piece of himself when Ethan died. He nodded, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to consume him. "Yes, Lena. Ethan was my son. Your brother." Lena nodded too, though she still seemed uncertain, unsure of how to reconcile the grief of a brother she never met with the truth of who she was now. Thomas could see the confusion in her eyes, the mix of sorrow and longing that mirrored his own. But there was something else there, too, a glimmer of hope. "I never had anyone," Lena said, her voice breaking. "I've always wondered what it would feel like, to have someone who cared about me. To know where I came from." Thomas's heart cracked. He hadn't just lost Ethan, he had missed the opportunity to love his daughter, to be the father he should have been. But in that moment, he made a silent vow. He would be the father she needed now. "You're not alone anymore, Lena," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I'm here now. I'll take care of you, no matter what. You don't have to be lost anymore." Lena's face softened, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. "You mean that?" "I do," he replied, his heart swelling with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. "I'll never let you go." The room seemed to fill with warmth, the storm outside still raging, but it felt like the world had shifted somehow. Lena wasn't a stranger to him anymore, she was family. His daughter. A bond formed not from blood alone, but from something deeper, something more profound, a shared grief, a shared love, and a promise that no matter the past, they could build something new together. As the hours passed, they talked more about their lives, their losses, and their hopes for the future. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one neither of them had expected, but one they would face side by side. And as the storm outside began to subside, Thomas knew that though the road ahead would be difficult, they would walk it together, as a father and daughter. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past lifting, replaced by the overwhelming joy of knowing he was no longer alone. The next few days were a blur of new beginnings and deep conversations. Thomas found himself thinking about things he hadn't in years, about the things he could have done differently, the things he wished he'd known. Lena's presence in his life, though unexpected, began to fill the emptiness that had haunted him since the loss of his son. But despite his growing attachment to her, Thomas still wrestled with a sense of guilt. How could he be the father she needed when he had never even known she existed? How could he give her what she deserved when his own life was so broken and uncertain? His small shop barely made enough to pay the bills, and yet, now he had a daughter to care for, a daughter who deserved everything he couldn't yet give her. Lena, however, didn't seem to mind. She didn't need luxuries or fancy things. What she needed was love and security, things Thomas could provide, even if it was in small ways. One afternoon, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Thomas and Lena sat on the porch of the old house behind the garage. The air smelled fresh, the scent of rain still lingering, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas allowed himself to breathe deeply. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it didn't seem as heavy now. He had Lena beside him, and that made all the difference. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we hadn't lost Ethan?" Lena asked quietly, looking out over the yard, her voice distant. Thomas paused. He had asked himself that very question countless times. The thought of Ethan still brought a sharp pain, but with Lena here, he realized something. He would never be able to replace Ethan, and he didn't want to. Ethan had been his son, and no one would ever take his place. But Lena wasn't a substitute for the life he had lost. She was her own person, with her own story to tell. "I think about him every day," Thomas said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't think that will ever change. But you're not him, Lena. And you never will be. You're you, and that's enough. More than enough. Lena turned to look at him, her eyes soft with understanding. She smiled faintly, a smile that held both sadness and hope. I just don't want to disappoint you, she admitted. You've been through so much, and now you have me to take care of. I don't want to make things harder for you. Thomas's heart swelled with affection for her. She was just a girl, lost and searching, yet she already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. He could see how much she wanted to be good enough, how desperately she needed to feel wanted, needed. You could never disappoint me, Lena, he said firmly, reaching out to gently grasp her hand. You're my daughter, and that's all that matters. We'll figure it out together, okay? Lena's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different, softer, more hopeful. She squeezed his hand back. I'm scared, she whispered. I don't know how to trust people. I've never had anyone to rely on. Thomas knew the feeling all too well. He had lived most of his life without relying on anyone, not after Ethan's death. But in that moment, as he held Lena's hand, he knew that things could be different. You don't have to be scared anymore, Lena, he said with more certainty than he felt. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. You can rely on me, I promise. For the first time, Lena seemed to believe him. A small, fragile smile appeared on her face, and Thomas felt a flicker of hope. He might not have the answers, and he might not have everything she needed, but he had love to give. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. In the days that followed, Thomas found himself working harder than ever. His mind was focused on providing for Lena, on making sure she had everything she needed to feel safe, to feel loved. The town, too, began to rally around them. Neighbors, hearing the story of how Thomas had taken in the daughter he never knew he had, began offering support. Some brought over meals, others helped with odd jobs. There was an outpouring of kindness, of goodwill, and it made Thomas realize just how many people cared about him. But none of it mattered more than the bond he was building with Lena. They started to talk more about their hopes for the future, about things that made them laugh, about everything and nothing. They would fix up old cars together, and Thomas would tell her stories about Ethan, about the boy she would never know, but who she would always be connected to. Lena would listen intently, asking questions, sharing her own thoughts. As they worked side by side, Thomas felt a deep, quiet joy fill him. This wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was his. And it was enough. I've been thinking, Lena said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Maybe I could help you with the shop. I mean, I'm not good at much, but I could learn. I want to help. Thomas smiled, his heart light. You're already helping, kid. Just by being here. Lena smiled back, her eyes filled with warmth. You know, she said thoughtfully, I think we can make this work. I think we can really make this work. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas believed it, too. Days turned into weeks, and as time passed, a new sense of peace settled into Thomas's life. He and Lena worked together, fixing cars, learning to trust one another, and slowly but surely, building a bond that neither of them could have predicted. Every morning, they greeted the day with a quiet determination, each of them healing in ways they didn't fully understand. Lena had grown more confident, her laughter no longer just a rare sound but a frequent one. The weight of her past didn't seem as heavy anymore, and she had begun to embrace the idea of family, a concept that had once felt foreign to her. She helped in the shop, learning the ropes, and for the first time, Thomas felt a deep sense of pride. Not in the work they did, but in the way they had started to rebuild their lives together. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the shop, Lena approached him with something in her hands. It was an old photo album, worn from years of use, its pages yellowed with age. She had been going through some of the old boxes in the back room and found it tucked away. I found this, she said quietly, sitting beside him. It's pictures of Ethan, isn't it? Thomas's heart skipped a beat as he took the album from her hands. As he flipped through the pages, he saw his son's face staring back at him, smiling, playing, living. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet every memory rushed back in waves. He felt a lump form in his throat, but as he looked at Lena, he saw something different. There was no sadness in her eyes, no sense of longing. Instead, there was understanding. She understood his grief, and she shared in it. "I wish you could have known him," Thomas said softly. "Ethan would have loved you." Lena smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I feel like I know him, in a way." And in that moment, Thomas realized that Lena wasn't just his daughter by name. She was his family, and together, they were stronger than they had ever been apart. They had both found a way to carry the past and look toward the future. For the first time, Thomas felt complete again.